Naturally, with greater inequality, people are less caring of one another. In fact, mistrust and inequality, I think, reinforce each other. Now, this point is probably enough for a one-hour lecture in and of itself. What is a society if people cannot trust each other? It's important to realize that the idea of friendship and the notions that couple in with friendship, which is ultimately a quality of trust, is a characteristic completely opposed to the competition mentality and the economic theories of self-interest we see today. Empathy, reciprocation, and cooperation equates to good health, while suspicion, fight, competition always equates to high levels of stress and hence destruction. As we'll talk about in a second, stress is one of the deadliest killers that we know of. It's a secret killer. And living in a society where you have to look over your shoulder and where you have to fight for everything that you have, where you have to question virtually every transaction given the initial assumption that the person might be trying to pull one over on you for their own betterment. The fact of the matter is we thrive socially on trust and cooperation, provably by health standards. And social structures which create relationships based on inequality, inferiority, and social exclusion are inflicted with the greatest deal of social pain and neuroses. Let's move on to educational scores. This one's very interesting. Not only do more unequal countries have worse educational attainment, kids are more likely to drop out of school as well. Interestingly, class distinctions and their effect have become very obvious in this regard. For example, a study was done in 2004 where they took 321 high-caste Indian boys and put them with 321 low-caste Indian boys, and they were given a task of solving a certain problem. The first time they did this, the caste relationship, the social status, was not announced to these children. They had no idea who was around them. And you can see the caste unannounced, low caste actually beat the high caste. The second time they did it, the results were dramatically skewed, as the lower caste did much worse than before, while the higher caste did better. This is psychological. It's a psychosocial superiority relationship that has been repeated many times in many cases through other studies, which has the exact same consequence. People are greatly affected by their perceived status in society. When we expect to be viewed as inferior, very often we perform as such. Homicide rates. As you can see, the United States blows everything out of the water when it comes to homicide rates. And obviously, if you look at the regression trend, homicide rates are naturally more common in unequal societies. In fact, violence itself is probably the most established attribute of social inequality over any of the things that we're talking about in these examples. James Gilligan, who was a prison psychiatrist for 25 years, and he is currently director for the Center for Study of Violence at Harvard University, had this to say about his experience dealing with violent criminals to the extensive length that he has. The prison inmates I work with have told me repeatedly, when I asked them why they have assaulted someone, that it was because he disrespected me. The word disrespect is central in the vocabulary, moral value system, and psychodynamics of these chronically violent men. I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated, disrespected, and ridiculed, and did not represent an attempt to prevent or undo this loss of face, no matter how severe the punishment. For we misunderstand these men at our peril if we do not realize they mean it literally when they say they would rather kill or mutilate others, be killed, than live without pride, dignity, and self-respect. They literally prefer death to dishonor. It's really easy to see how class relationships and hence income inequality can translate into feelings of humiliation, loss of control, disrespect, and ridicule. You know, when someone loses their job, it's often demoralizing. They say, oh, my husband's unemployed, and it's this demoralizing thing, oh, he's unemployed. After all, the very nature of class is hierarchical. In other words, the upper class really looks down upon the lower class, historically speaking. And to be looked down upon is essentially humiliating. Therefore, it should be no surprise why the United States has the largest number of homicides in the world, given its extreme income inequality. And this leads us to rates of imprisonment. The trend is very acute as well. Obviously, as we can see, imprisonment rates are much higher in unequal countries. The more unequal the country, the more people in prison. However, what is interesting about this reality is that it doesn't just relate to rates of crime, which of course is more prevalent in unequal societies, but it also has to do with the punitive attitudes toward the so-called criminal elements of society. In other words, the more unequal the society, the harsher the punishments are for a given offense. And hence, more people are put into prison for longer periods of time than they are in more equal countries. Since 1984, the state of California has built 1 new school and 20 new prisons. As an aside, for those out there who think the prison system might serve some therapeutic rehabilitation role in the modification of human beings and human behavior, I would like to refer back once again to our prison psychiatrist James Gilligan for his perspective. He states, "The most effective way to turn a nonviolent person into a violent one is to send him to prison. The criminal justice and penal systems have been operating under a huge mistake, namely the belief that punishment will deter, prevent, or inhibit violence, when in fact it is the most powerful stimulant of violence we have yet discovered." Now, here's a very interesting one, social mobility. Social mobility has to do with the class relationship that you have upon your birth and how easy it is for you to move up out of that class or lower than that class during your life. In other words, if you're born into poverty, how much of a possibility do you have to become wealthy? Well, as you can see by this chart, the United States, home of the American dream, has the lowest mobility rate of all the countries in the sample set. There are very high odds that if you were born into poverty, you will stay in poverty. Likewise, if you were born into great wealth, you will stay wealthy most likely for the rest of your life. And if you think about it, it's really a form of class segregation. This reality can be blamed in part on the very mechanisms of our financial system, which keeps the lower classes poor and the upper classes rich deliberately. As a quick example of this, which I've stated before, but I think it's a very important example, if you have $1 million and you put it into a CD at a bank at 5% interest, you're going to generate $50,000 a year simply for that deposit. You are making money off of money itself, paper made on paper, nothing more, no invention, no contribution to society, nothing. That being denoted, if you are a lower to middle class person who is limited in funds, which must get an interest-based loan like most people to buy their home or use credit cards, then you are paying interest to the bank, which the bank is then using, in theory, to pay the person's return with the 5% CD. Not only is this equation outrageously offensive due to the use of interest to steal from the poor and give to the rich, but it also perpetuates class stratification by its very design, keeping the lower classes poor under the constant burden of debt while keeping the upper classes rich with the means to turn excess money magically into more money with zero labor or social contribution. This is only one mechanism, by the way, which is used to make sure these class attributes or class segregation is maintained. Infant mortality, very simply, more high in unequal countries than less unequal countries. Obesity, naturally, higher in more unequal countries. Teenage birth rates, higher in more unequal countries. Innovation, I love this one, because it's a total slap in the face to all of those party line toting market enthusiasts who seem to think that the competitive-based incentive system of seeking profit translates into new innovations for the common good. I'm sorry to say, that isn't the case whatsoever. Using the measure of patents per million, Finland, Sweden, and Ireland trump the United States when it comes to invention. And finally, let's take a look at an aggregate summation that was compiled of the many points that we have just examined
This chart shows
life expectancy, math, literacy, infant mortality, homicides, imprisonment, teenage births, trust, obesity, mental illness, drugs, alcohol use, and social mobility. As you can see, in the United States, with the highest level of stratification, we are the absolute worst. And just to make sure you understand this analysis clearly, here is a chart showing absolute income of the same thing you just saw. As you can tell, there is no pattern. There is no trend regression line. Here they are side by side, so you can see how viable this information really is. The trend is very clear about the ramifications of inequality in a given country or social environment. As a final point on this topic of inequality and its consequences, I want to bring up a study called the Whitehall study, which was in 2 rounds, 1 and 2, stretching over, I believe, about 60 or 70 years. Professor Michael Marmont of the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health at University College of